I kind of always like to start at the very beginning. So, how did you know where your focus was going to be? I know when we discussed just a few minutes ago about kind of the first past the post system in Ireland, but does that even apply to, say, finance degrees or within the financial world or accounting?
I think going into it, you apply for your top 10 courses that you might like to do. And then it's a clearinghouse system in terms on your final grades, in terms of the person with the best grades in the entire country gets their first choice. And then so on down the system in terms of, and you have to accept the highest placed course on that list that you applied for. So you're going into it, you kind of need to know what you want to do, or at least have an idea. You can change course along the way, but I think that's at your expense. Your first undergrad course in Ireland is free. And so then it's a willingness to pay in terms of if you got it wrong and then you want to pivot. And so going into that, I knew I wanted to work in, finance or accounting somewhere. And that's where I landed in undergrad doing commerce in Dublin. And then after that, I got recruited into one of the big accounting firms to work in M&A and the corporate finance team. So I jumped from corporate finance, pushed the finance aspect of my role, but then at the same time did a master's in accounting, so that there was, this is pre-Sarbanes-Oxley, so I could work in M&A and corporate finance type transactions while qualifying as a CPA or chartered accountant in European language. But, so that was my entree into the workforce, is that, what we'd call it in Europe, like the milk rounds, where all of the big employers would come and present to your school, to your class, and you'd have a career day and maybe connect with somebody, and that'd put you in a funnel for career opportunities.
If you actually look at the enrollment numbers, they've been declining pretty precipitously because, again, the perception, I think, has been that accounting can be very stale. But again, what I thought was really interesting about your career was just how you've actually moved it more, and like you talked about, into a strategic function for yourself, not
Right.
just keeping, that silo of I'm an accountant. So I was wondering, can you maybe describe a bit about your advice for students to do that? Or do you think that it's very good to kind of get that narrow focus and then broaden?
Yeah. And so look, I did what was primarily an accounting, a finance and accounting degree, but it was broad based in terms of business studies. Commerce was the title of the degree. But I think even when you have decided you're going down that accounting track, you're not saying I am not going to work in finance. I think you can end up in commercial accounting roles, or really people differentiate it with the language of, hey, I work in commercial finance versus I work in sales accounting, for example. And I think if you work in that accounting world, you have to think about it that you're on a realm where you're trying to optimize the transactional aspect to the role, and you're ultimately perhaps building to be a chief accounting officer, versus finance is more, I'm trying to be a business partner to the business, and my end state might be that, hey, I want to be a CFO.
Got it.
And I differentiate the transactional piece from the strategic, business partnership, trying to develop insights and analytics. And perhaps the reason that you find that people are, less drawn to accounting versus, finance, is that I think anything transactional over time, is it automatable? You're spending a lot of time in RPA, setting up those capabilities. I think that there's a real gap in the market for students coming out today, or there's a real opportunity for them today in terms of, if you have that right blend of, I'm going to say, computer science capabilities with, underlying understanding as to finance and accounting, I think that could be a whole career stream in its own. Like if I think about our org chart, like a lot of big companies are having the conversations around, okay, do we need an embedded, I'm going to say, data and analytics group, versus should the organization have a data and analytics group? And a lot of that, you know, the people who are landing in those roles are people coming out of accounting and finance opportunity, or college, degree programs, or postgraduate programs, and with that core accounting skill set in terms of, once you understand how the transaction should happen, it's easier to automate them, or string them together, or if the data fields, it's easier to kind of do the analytics that you need to do to make insight, create insights around the business or whatever it may be.
Because I think there's a bit of a tension, because obviously we've heard some advice of like always raise your hand for like hard assignments or volunteer for what no one wants to do. How do you reckon that with, again, being more your own advocate of like, hey, I want to go do XYZ things? Is it better to kind of, look where the managers are asking people to go and just raise your hand to tackle those tough challenges? Or do you need to be a little bit more strategic in terms of combining that with where you want to go? Or when you're young, you might just not know. And so,
Yeah, well, I can, talk like personal experiences. Or like for a long time in my career, I didn't really know where I wanted to go. But people kind of took me there. But in the so therefore that, takes you away from the ability of saying, hey, I know I want to be X. I think if you, from a point of view of charting your career, let's just say, as an exercise, if you said, hey, in 5 years I want to be here, which very few people actually say, right? But it's kind of understanding the building blocks of how you might get there, and it doesn't have to be a straight line. You could pick up different skill sets along the way in order to get there. But I think that you need to understand that, okay, if I need, let's just say, somebody with the role that you aspire to needs an ability to sort of manage the finance and accounting for a supply chain, then you need to at some point do some work in supply chain, or else it's all very aspirational. Or if I want to work in futures and options, at somewhere at some point along the line you need practical exposure to hedging and risk. I think that the I did versus I would like to do, the I did is always a lot more powerful as a statement. And therefore I think putting your hand up to say, put me in, coach, is going to serve you better.